Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to the Underground. This is the Intel update for September 8th through the 14th of 2024, so let's get right to it. This week we have a lot of things that are kind of up in the air, still developing, or otherwise just more along the lines of an indicator for later. Not a lot of details right now. So, one of the first things I wanted to highlight before we get into the regions is over the past couple of weeks, I've gotten a lot of messages from a lot of you out there talking about the drastic increase in school threats, bomb threats at schools, active shooter threats. I have gotten several hundred messages from a lot of you out there on varying platforms. I'm sorry I can't reply to all of you, but this has become quite a trend. People noticing or getting emails that their school's on lockdown because there was a threat or so on and so forth. Now, this seems like it could be a pretty big rapid rise in these kinds of threats going on around the country. Almost none of them are like come to fruition or anything. It's mostly just the threats that have got people concerned because they'll get an email that their kid's school got locked down because of some threat or so on and so forth. These incidents usually spike right after a major incident. As we all know, we had that school shooting down in Georgia. So after that, it's kind of expected that you're going to see a lot of threats being made, a lot of copycats. Unfortunately, that sort of thing happens pretty much with every one of these incidents. But we also have to keep in perspective that I don't necessarily know if this is a sort of harbinger of things to come. This past month or so, all of these sorts of threats just kind of skyrocketing. I don't know. I would be more inclined to think that it's probably election year stuff. So again, as malign actors around the globe seek to cause problems for the United States, either within the United States or foreign actors like Russia or China or something like that, these kinds of things tend to happen. Now again, because it's in the cyber realm, and we just don't have that much fidelity on where these threats are coming from. It's hard to say, but I just instinctively kind of have noticed, and I'm sure many of you have noticed as well, these kinds of things tend to skyrocket when there's political turmoil in the United States. So, causation, correlation, I don't know. I just thought I'd point it out because so many of you have messaged me about this, really over the past month or so, past few weeks kind of more intently. So, again, I thought I would mention this just in case you have noticed this yourself. A lot of places are locking down for an hour or two. Everybody's on edge, so there's a lot of proactiveness. There's a lot of overreacting, which is not bad. It's better to go with the worst case scenario, be precautious and things like that. But yeah, I've noticed that there's an increase in this sort of thing. Again, I personally think it's election year stuff. It's tied to the crazy times of trying to destabilize the United States, foreign or domestically. So, speaking of crazy times, in New York, another NYPD commissioner is out. So Edward Caban resigned yesterday. This is probably related to the ongoing corruption probe between him and his brother. Like I mentioned before, when the scandal kind of kicked off, I don't necessarily know if it's genuine or not, but the allegations are that his brother is basically a fixer, problem solver kind of thing. And he used his brother's status as being the chief law enforcement entity for New York City to basically just make problems go away. Whether this is true or not, I don't know. Again, anytime the FBI is involved in something that is really big like this, you really got to wonder, especially considering how our nation is going these days. But either way, it's kind of an interesting thing. He was on the job for a little over a year before stepping down. It's not certain as to when his resignation will be effective. His announcement made it sort of sound like it was immediately, but I don't really know when he's going to actually have a replacement or when a replacement's going to be appointed. Either way, he's the third guy in almost 4 years, so it will be interesting to see who his replacement is, considering all of the legalities and legal issues from Second Amendment stuff to Trump stuff, anything in between. The legal kind of atmosphere within New York is very interesting at the moment. And even though it's kind of out of the law enforcement side of things, it's more into the court side of things now. It's still going to be interesting to see who gets on the job next. So either way, we'll see how that goes. Moving on down to Massachusetts, another rather unfortunate incident that occurred the day before yesterday in Boston, another self-immolation incident. The reason that I wanted to talk about this one a little bit more than just noting that it happened is because the mainstream media appears to be, and it's just my opinion, I think that they're trying to camouflage this one. Because every single mainstream media report that I have found mentions that this incident, guy set himself on fire outside the Four Seasons Hotel in Boston. If you're familiar with the area at all, you know that this is, obviously the Four Seasons is not, your Super 8, so you can kind of passively just know that this is a very ritzy neighborhood. If you look on Google Maps, you can find out that, yeah, it is. And if you do a little bit of digging, you can find out that the dude set himself on fire on the sidewalk outside the Four Seasons. That's true. That is a factual statement, but they're leaving out the second part, which is more important. Across the street is the Saunders Building, which is host to a few different diplomatic missions, but mostly the Israeli consulate for Boston. So, yeah, I think this is related. It's probably another horrific, exceptionally graphic means of protest against Israel. We've seen this happen a few times, usually in conjunction with something that Israel has done in Gaza that has kind of stirred up feelings, The reason that I say this was probably it is because this site, the Saunders Building, there have been protests there. So it's not like this guy just went on to Google Maps and saw the Israeli consulate and said, I'm going to go do this there. This is a well-known site, so I don't know. With these very, very graphic incidents, it's hard to say, was this a mental health thing or was this a protest thing? For me, I think there's very little difference between the two with this kind of thing. So I would think that if you're going to self-immolate anywhere, there's going to be a pretty good chunk of that related to mental illness or some kind of mental health problem. So it's really hard to say. Generally speaking, if somebody's going to do something that drastic, they're going to make sure people know what it was for. But again, you can't really be certain because there's the mental aspect to it, right? So again, it's a really graphic thing. I don't know very much about it. Again, it's one of those things that's kind of up in the air. But I didn't want to highlight it because, well, it's one of those things that's probably going to keep happening as long as the situation in the Gaza region, continues to not be super great. It's still pretty rare, but it's more, I guess, more along the lines of an indicator for society. When you have a lot of people setting themselves on fire in protest for some other reason, that tends to not necessarily be a good, thing for your country sort of thing. So if people are if that many people, and it's still rare, we're only talking one or two or three or four now, I guess. But still, if there's that many, you can go 10, 20 years without anybody setting themselves on fire for some cause or something, and then now it's all of a sudden you've gotten how many? I don't even really know, because I think others have probably been suppressed or I just missed them entirely. So I don't know. It's maybe just kind of an indicator for how tense things are, even though that there's just not much there. We can't really get much fidelity on what's going on there. So let's move on down to the southeast. Yet another sort of speculation-heavy incident. This is the manhunt for Joseph Couch. So for those of you who are unaware of the general gist of the story, this guy set an ambush site up on I-75, shot a bunch of passing cars, and now he's scooted off into the wilderness. And there's been a manhunt that's been going on for 6 days now. So again, media coverage of this has been extensive, so I'm not going to go into too much detail on that, but the motivations for why he did what he did, like I mentioned in The Wire, it's really unknown. And I'll get into this in a moment, but generally, for right now, it's assessed by the local authorities that he may be hiding out in Daniel Boone Forest. That is, if he's not deceased. This is an important factor because law enforcement have sort of released details of communications that he had with a female contact of unknown relationship to the shooter that indicated that he had planned to conduct this attack and then take his own life. So that little detail is kind of everything for this story, and the nature of trying to find this guy. So again, just very, very wave top level. If we've got a situation around the country, shooter commits some kind of crime, they're able to get away, and they're able to survive the first 48 hours of being a fugitive, they usually get away. So that's kind of the benchmark. Usually if somebody can do something and then evade capture for 48 hours, they're long gone. There are exceptions to this, but generally speaking, fugitives almost always get caught later. So that same person who does something, they get away, they're long gone after the first 2 days. Usually they're found months later by making some sort of stupid mistake or being complacent. So it's kind of hard to be, live completely off grid and be a complete ghost in society today in the long term. You can maybe get away with anonymity in the short term, but generally speaking, you're going to need a job. The feds are going to know who you are at some point. So this guy has been missing, or they've been searching for him for 6 days. So that being considered, and the details of the communications that he had with that female party, there are a couple of diverging possibilities. I'm sure that the local authorities are considering many more possibilities, but just for those of you who may still be on the lookout for this guy, there are probably 2 courses of action or 2 diverging paths that could be the reason why this guy hasn't been found in 6 days. Both of which are related to the extremely rugged terrain. So both of these theories of where he is and why they haven't been able to find him yet kind of center around 2 ideas. One is if he planned this incident deliberately, and 2 is if he didn't plan the incident. So the initial details that we know about this guy, local authorities were kind of given the vibe out that he just snapped, he had some kind of mental health crisis or lost his mind or something, and went and just picked random targets. So he didn't really plan it in that much in advance. He just grabbed his rifle, grabbed his car, and just went. That's what local authorities have kind of sheepishly been kind of going with for their main theory. If this is what he did, then, and if he did this and then carried through on his original plan, his body would be pretty much impossible to find. I mean, if you just look at the terrain, Danger Boone National Forest, that is a big place, and you can hide pretty much anywhere. So if he did this incident, ran off with no gear, no supplies, no equipment, ran a couple miles into the forest, found some hole to crawl into, and, finished his plan, so to speak, he ain't ever going to be found. You can disappear in that area. So, you don't need logistics or sustainment. If you're deceased, you also don't really show up that well on thermal if you're deceased. So, again, hard to find. So it may take a few more days, maybe even a few weeks or so, maybe for cadaver dogs to go find this guy, maybe. But it just really just depends. So, but again, it's been 6 days. It's going on 7 days now. So, again, that we're now talking like the dog should have found him by now, or something. Something should have been found. So that kind of makes, if I'm just kind of telepathically trying to figure out what the search team is prioritizing, that would make me think, if I haven't found this guy, if he's not planned this, if he's on foot in rugged terrain, he ditched his rifle, he probably doesn't have any gear, he ain't going far. He's probably going farther than you think, but he's not going that far. So 6 days you should have found him. If you haven't found him in 6 days, you have to reassess your priors, right? Going back to Bayesian thinking, right? So you have to reassess your initial assessment, which is that he didn't plan this. If he did plan this, he ain't ever going to be found. He's gone. Because if he was able to cache weapons, cache supplies at predetermined places, and he was able to commit the crime, then shoot and scoot sort of thing, he's gone. You'll have to wait for the marshals or something to pick him up in Tijuana or someplace. So, again, for the locals who have been on, red alert for 6 days, these are things to consider, especially considering people are people are losing their stuff a lot more often lately, and it seems like this may become more common. I mean, I don't know, but it seems to me like, as things get more serious, people start getting to the end of their rope, sort of thing. These kinds of things tend to happen a little bit more often. We're not really living in super great times, and when these kinds of incidents start increasing in frequency, that kind of reaffirms that. So, should you plan for this? I don't know, but just as a very brief kind of digression for a moment, maybe I should do a whole video on this. I'm sure somebody else more qualified is going to do more content on this, but freeway shooter scenario, this incident has given us a lot of reminders, right? And I'll just cover a couple of them very, very briefly. Again, just due to the importance of this carrying medical with you, man, that is so, so important. Freeway shooter scenario, man, I could go on for a few hours on this one. It's one of those scenarios where if you look at your risk management matrix, it doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it can be very, very serious, because freeways or interstates, they offer very, very unique challenges. First of all, there's usually clear line of sight. You're usually on the X. You're usually in the ambush site, and it's hard to move off the X because, say this scenario happens to you, right? Someone shoots at your car randomly going down the highway, you're probably going to stop. If you're wounded, you might be forced to stop, and now you're still in the vicinity of the X, little cover. The shooter's already gotten a good range on you. You see how this can snowball. Also, another thing to remember is navigation. How many of you driving down the interstate look at the mile marker and note where you are? You need to do this. This is super, super important, and I think I'm like the only person that I think actively does this. If you're driving down the interstate, look at the mile markers, every single one of them, and remember the last one you saw. GPS is great, fine, but if you are bleeding out, if you're wounded and you've got your cell phone in one hand, you've got to be able to call 911 and tell the authorities which mile marker you're at or where you are at and what characteristics to look for. The good news is that interstates are MSRs. They're main supply routes or major surface roads, however you wanted to use the acronym. So authorities, medical can get to you very quickly. Just knowing where you're at is kind of a hard thing to do sometimes, though. So just take note of the last exit you saw, the last mile marker you saw, just in case, right? It doesn't hurt, to do these sorts of things. You're talking about, interstate travel is so much more dangerous in many regards, because when something can happen, it can be very, very catastrophic. You can have very catastrophic injuries in an austere environment, right? So you're away from medical care, and you're still in a dangerous situation because a car is whizzing by you. So again, I could talk more about this at great length, but I just wanted to remind everyone who might be thinking about this situation and trying to glean some very rapid, quick-fire knowledge from it. The last one, again, firearms and training, enough said on that sort of thing. I don't know how realistic it would be. Probably not very realistic at all. I know that if I get shot at on the freeway, I'm probably, and if I can, push through that ambush, get off the X, move through that place. I'm not going to be looking for my truck gun, sort of scenario that a lot of people are looking for. I'm going to try to get through that situation really, really quickly. So again, I know a lot of conjecture, a lot of unknowns. We just don't know. A lot of things to think about, but nothing really to sink your teeth into with this sort of thing. And I know it seems like, is this another thing for us to be terrified about, in our daily lives now? I don't know. Probably not, but the potential's there. And the next couple of months, up until inauguration and probably a little bit shortly after, are going to be very, very crazy. So I would make more deliberate plans to be a little bit more prepared, this winter, as we get through the election, through inauguration. Then things will probably calm down a little bit. Who knows how that's going to go? But generally speaking, once a consensus has been formed and a system has been put in place, whatever that system may be, even if it's a really bad system, usually there's going to be a level of stability. So we're now living in times of uncertainty, instability, crazy things happen, random things happen. You see how this can be a little bit more of a risky time for all concerned. So moving over to the Midwest, let's talk about Ohio for a moment. And of course, this is in relation to the recent Haitian controversy in Springfield, Ohio. So for those of you who have been living under a rock and have not been force-fed content on this, the general gist of the story is that the town of Springfield, Ohio has had a very strong influx of Haitian migrants from Haiti who have flown directly from Port-au-Prince directly into Ohio and set up shop there. The reason that this has become such an issue is that Springfield, Ohio is kind of a small town. Well, not really, but it's a smaller city. It's only got around 60,000 people. Census data is actively being manipulated now, I suspect. But generally speaking, let's go with the number of 60,000 residents or natives for now. And that has been increased to between 15 and 40,000 Haitians. So again, the numbers are very wildly differing, mostly because of the next point, which is that this issue has become a political issue because Trump said it, J.D. Vance said it on the campaign trail and highlighted it, and this has become kind of a thing politically. I am personally kind of hesitant to lean on the Springfield, Ohio thing so much, mostly because this is not a case study. This is happening everywhere around this country. This is not a small issue. This is happening in many other places. It's just Springfield has had such a problem because Haiti is probably the most third world country in this hemisphere, in North and South America and Central America all combined. Haiti is the worst country. Like, it's one of the worst countries in the world in terms of crime, in terms of culture, in terms of economy. Basically, by every factor you could possibly imagine, Haiti is the worst of the worst. So, you might find, shocker, that a lot of the people fresh off the boat or fresh off the government-paid airplane don't necessarily blend in super well with American culture. So, there have been a lot of controversies. I am sure that all of your social media feeds have been filled with rather graphic and disturbing content regarding what these Haitians have been doing in Springfield, so I will not go into detail. But just generally speaking, this is now a political issue. Now, there's a few different things going on. The media is trying to make it out like this is a good thing. If any of you could see my Twitter feed, oh, good grief. No, it is not a good thing. This is very, very horrifically bad. And just like the TDA issue in Colorado, it would probably be a good idea for most Americans to kind of understand what's going on here. Don't listen to the mainstream media. Interestingly enough, the mainstream media reporting on this issue specifically has been very, very, totalitarian. I would argue maybe we're seeing COVID era misinformation being spread by the mainstream media on this specific incident. I don't know why, but I thought it was very interesting when I was trying to find some information, because a lot of people, for whatever reason, don't like it when I talk about an issue that doesn't have mainstream media coverage. But anyway, I tried to find some mainstream media coverage on this, what the Haitians are doing in Springfield and why the Springfield, locals are freaking out, and mainstream media is like absolutely insane on the topic. Very interesting. And I suspect that this might be due to the mainstream media thinking that this is now a weak point for Trump, a weak point for the Trump campaign, so they're going to go after it. Maybe. I don't know. I just found it very, very interesting that out of all the issues that misinformation and propaganda and straight up lies are being told by the mainstream media, this one's the worst in recent memory. I don't know why, but it's very interesting. Maybe they're trying to cover up the nature of cultures. I don't know. Interesting. I thought I would elaborate on that a little bit more, just because I didn't write about it at all this week in The Wire, and I know a lot of people are kind of talking about it. I know a lot of people have kind of just blocked that content off of social media just because the graphic stuff that's out there on this, man, good grief. Still, it's a big issue. It's a big deal. The Springfield residents are freaking out, rightfully so. I'm sorry I don't have any answers for those of you who may be watching from Springfield. I don't have any answers for you. But we can start to see how this becomes more of a problem, because these people didn't just migrate there naturally. They were put there deliberately by NGOs and government operations. So your tax dollars paid for it probably. You just follow the money, you'll figure out who did it. But this becomes more of a problem considering what we have going on out west. So again, I basically recycled this slide from last week. Shocker, right? All I have to do is change a few words. The TDA shot callers who were arrested have been released, at least 2 of them. So these guys were released on $1,000 bail, never to be seen again. Again, this is going to embolden everybody else to know that, well, they'll just get a slap on the wrist, probably get their bail paid by somebody else, paid with cash by the cartel they literally work for, and they're gone, or they're going to stay. Who knows? Just keep recycling, just keep getting rearrested. These guys were charged with attempted murder, so this is a capital crime, right? So they were charged with attempted murder and given $1,000 bail. At some point you really have to wonder. Well, you don't really have to wonder anymore. This is now just deliberate. It's just open and deliberate, right? What is being done throughout the justice system to encourage these kinds of things. So I know this is not really particularly surprising, and I know that I've already kind of digressed quite a bit for today. I don't mean to rant and rave too much. I've just had too much coffee this morning. Anyway, these guys being released, par for the course. Like, this is gonna keep happening. This is definitely a situation of the beatings will continue until morale improves. So the differences between Ohio and Colorado are largely just, it's a very different dynamic. In Colorado, we've got a rapid influx of terrain denial sort of operations going on, encirclement, occupation operations by a criminal syndicate from a South American nation. That's a little bit different. Organized crime is a lot different than natives being native, so the problems that Springfield's having is not necessarily organized crime, it's just straight up street crime and the horrific nature of it. So, there's a huge problem there. It's cultural as well. There aren't a whole lot of TDA guys snatching up family pets to use them in sacrificial voodoo rituals, which is something that I never imagined I would ever say in a briefing, but here we are in Springfield, I guess. So for those of you who are looking to be a little bit more proactive and figure out what's going on with this, these two incidents seem kind of related, but they're really not. The differences between what's going on in Ohio and Colorado are very, very different. They're destroying the local communities, but they're doing so in very different ways. I mean, for instance, TDA, organized crime from a foreign international crime syndicate, that's a little bit different than Haitians coming to Ohio and turning a small town Americana sort of situation into the third world. That's very different. So there's crime increase no matter what, but organized crime, especially from a cartel nature sort of arrangement, is a lot different than just regular street crime. I mean, it's hard to argue which one's worse. So that's it for the United States. I know not really a particularly satisfying week, I'm sorry. Lots of conjecture, sorry again. But I've really been focusing on a lot more abstract stuff this week, such as what's going on in Ukraine and how that's going to affect how we move forward this winter. So lots of movements being made. I'm not going to talk about the military stuff, just going to keep things at a wave top level today. Mostly because it's hard to find really good information, and I just do not have time. There are 50,000 Ukrainian experts on the internet already. Go figure out from them what's going on if you're trying to figure out which village just got taken last night or whatnot. I can generally say the Ukrainian offensive in Kursk continues, though is it still an offensive at this point? I don't know. They still hold a lot of terrain. Russia's consolidated some. Russia's made a lot of advances in the east, but it's hard to say how far they've gone. It's also hard to say how or what Russians are doing to push back against the Kursk offensive. Like I wrote in The Wire, I think last week, maybe this week, I can't remember. It seems like the Russian doctrine so far has been, a lot of people were saying they were stupid and they were just slow to react, and Ukrainians caught them with their pants down. That was a good theory. That was a good theory. It could be true. See, the Russians have a way of having two things true at the same time when they do warfare stuff. So it could be the Russians did get caught with their pants down, and the Ukrainian offensive in Kursk pushed a lot further than Russia wanted it to. But there's also the old tradition going back to World War I and even before that, Russian tradition of let your enemy come deep inside your territory before you surround them. Whether or not this is intentional, still to this day, Russia says, yeah, we meant to do that. We meant to let the Germans during World War II get almost all the way to Moscow. We totally meant to do that. Hard to say if it's true or not. So the Russians are kind of doing the same thing. Yeah, we let them get almost all the way to Kursk, and the hammer's going to drop any day now. There's also that. There's also the real world fact of Ukraine advanced into Russia with lightly armored vehicles, like mostly a reconnaissance asset. MRAPs, very little armor, but using it in a combined fashion with air and artillery. Shocker, I know it's surprising. Combined arms warfare works, and when Ukraine uses it, maybe they're able to, do a little bit better than they have been. But anyway, my coffee-driven ranting and digressions for today is not entirely useless, I think, because what happened in the past is going to explain what's happening in the present, and what happens in the present is going to impact what happens in the future. So, Kursk offensive occurs, Ukraine gets some traction, right? Generally speaking, I think that anyone who has read a Tom Clancy book once, and that's their entire warfare-like experience, anyone who's done that can look at this in the grand scheme of things and say, this doesn't usually work out very super well historically. If your nation is on the brink of collapse, your front lines are crumbling, hey, let's go launch a major offensive deep into enemy territory where there's no strategic gain to be had, and we're just going to sacrifice most of our experienced people for the inevitable counterattack, right? Again, I am no scholar of warfare studies or anything, but even I can see this is probably not going to work out super well. And because of that, Ukraine has shot themselves in the foot, or rather the United States has shot Ukraine in the foot by encouraging these shenanigans. This little escapade in Kursk has cost Ukraine a lot because they can't hold it. They're trying to hold it, but maybe they're trying to get a better position with negotiations. I don't know. All I know is that now Ukraine's pretty desperate. And what Ukraine is trying to do strategically, very broad brush, they realize that they can only do so much in Kursk. Their eastern front's crumbling. They can't hold on to Kursk very long, so what they're going to do is just go scorched earth. We're in a situation now where Kursk has now forced Ukraine into a tight spot, and now what both sides are trying to do is trying to end the war, or shall I say, end the war as it stands right now. The West is trying to expand it. The West is trying to start World War III. Okay, let's just get that onto the table. Again, that's just my opinion, but it seems like the West is trying to directly become more invested in this. And Russia is calling them out on that. So Putin, feelings on him personally aside, feelings on Russia aside, I know that talking about Putin in a slightly positive light in any form or fashion is just verboten in today's society, but anyway, Putin has called out the United States on this latest aid package and what the United States is cooking up with regards to the war in Ukraine. Russia is basically taking the position, Putin is taking the position that, and he said directly as much in a presser with, I think, RT or some other state media. He said basically, look, Ukraine doesn't have military satellites. NATO does. So if NATO is going to give Ukraine weapons that can only be used with NATO directly driving them, then Ukraine, this is no longer an advisory role. This is no longer NATO supporting Ukraine. This is NATO fighting Ukraine's war for them. And Putin has said this. So if NATO, if the United States gives Ukraine munitions that need things like military satellites to even launch or to for guidance or something like that, Putin will consider that to be an attack by NATO itself. Personally, I think that's a reasonable position to hold. I mean, it makes sense logically. Like, if Ukraine is now hands off. If you're giving Ukraine a missile that can only be used by the NATO advisors on the ground, now you're just fighting Russia openly. So, I don't know. Russia has called the United States out on the carpet for basically trying to sleepwalk or mission creep their way into fighting Russia directly without openly fighting Russia directly. And I think Russia is kind of at the next stage in the war where, hey, that ain't going to fly. So if a NATO missile comes, like if a German-made missile that Ukrainians don't even know how to use takes off from Ukraine, is flown by German advisors, strikes an apartment building in Moscow, Russia's going to point the finger at Germany, not at Ukraine, right? So same thing with a Polish missile or an American missile. It does make a lot of sense. Now, I don't want to give Putin too much credit because, I mean, they started this whole thing. Well, that's arguable too, I guess. But still, either way, this is not good. And I think that one of Russia's biggest problems is they talk a lot of talk. Russia talks a lot of talk. Dmitry Medvedev, if you get on his social media, it's like he's like the most schizo poster on the planet. Like he's like openly threatening the United States routinely. It's kind of hilarious, but still, like Russia's not super great for separating out the crying wolf things from the "you better not," like seriously type messages. I think Putin did this recent press statement on this to kind of convey, hey, look, we're not playing. Like if you launch a NATO missile with NATO advisors, using NATO assets, NATO satellites, NATO just attacked us, not Ukraine anymore. I don't know. I mean, again, perspective is everything, and a lot of people seem to conflate military strategy and military victory and military belligerence with morality. That's probably not the best way to look at it. So, keeping that in perspective, we also have to remember the West. The West has got a lot of problems. Poland, Germany, the United Kingdom, these three countries, France, oh, good grief, France as well, Spain too. All of these countries, right, pretty much every NATO member right now has gotten a lot of internal problems. Namely, that they don't want this. They realize that we're now at a stage where peace should have happened 2 years ago. Russia did what they did, fine, sanction Russia. Russia did invade a sovereign nation state for whatever, for reasons which are debatable. But by and large, now we're getting into a situation where it's more palpable that we're being run by morons. And what I mean by that is, generally speaking, you've got nation states in Europe. Let's take the United Kingdom, for instance. The United Kingdom is doing everything they possibly can to get themselves involved in a foreign war. Again, the United States does this too. But we're even seeing things like, the UK floating the idea in like various like press tabloids or whatever, talking about bringing back conscription. So generally speaking, I know this may be a surprising concept to many, but generally speaking, if you're trying to get your nation involved in a war, it's probably not a good idea to piss off the people who might be fighting it for you. So the United Kingdom is doing two things simultaneously. They are trying to encourage a war, and they're also doing everything they can to target the people that might fight that war. They're doing everything they can to tick off all the people in their own countries. That's why I focused on the winter fuel payment this week, because, cutting off the winter fuel payment for senior citizens and for pensioners and retirees and in the UK is it's very bad to do politically. It's sort of like in the United States if we told every senior citizen Social Security is gone, we're just going to stop your checks. Like that's the level of concern that might be had in the UK. Again, it's not a one-to-one thing. It's not the only social benefit there is. It's like a £200 or £300 payment once a year to help seniors pay for energy costs. I don't think we have that here in this country. It's just like a supplement in the UK. So, you know, generally speaking, if you want your citizens to be happy with you, cutting social programs is not something you would do, especially if you're trying to give yourself a pay raise at the same time. So, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the West's goal is. Just sheer lunacy? I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, Germany is doing everything they can to send their best and brightest missiles to Ukraine to get Germany more directly involved in the war in Ukraine. Because as we all know, the great Prussian military strategist Karl von Clausewitz always said that you want to join a war on the side of the losing party right before they're about to capitulate. That's a great strategy. Really great idea. Not really. So, you know, Germany trying to put a saddle on a dead horse is probably not a super great idea, especially if you're trying to do everything you can to persecute people within your own country who are going to be fighting that war for you. So, again, it's not a very easy thing to convey, I guess, and it's, again, lots of conjecture, lots of opinion, but, you know, a lot of things going on around the world, and maybe I'm just too stupid to realize what's going on. What's their game here? You know, what does Poland have to gain by not wanting to pursue a peaceful option, wanting to encourage Ukraine to just ride this out, ride it all the way down to the ground? You know, there's some benefit to be had there with Poland doing that, but antagonizing Russia in the process. You know, Ukraine's going to lose this war. Like, that's probably going to be the outcome. Like, I can't imagine a future in which Ukraine doesn't capitulate at some point. Like, that's just, I know it's offensive for many people out there, but I think that's kind of like a foregone conclusion. Just looking at it purely neutrally, you know, not picking a side or anything. I think it's very hard to suggest that Ukraine is going to walk away from this the winner. You know, Russia may not be the winner either. I mean, nobody really wins in war, but in terms of like the military objectives, Russia's probably going to meet them more. Russia's more likely to meet their own military objectives than Ukraine is, for sure. We already know Ukraine lost this war before they even started. They lost Crimea. So they lost the war before they even started. You know, their own military objectives were to keep their terrain. Well, they lost when they started. So, you know, but all of Western Europe just collectively losing their minds and trying to ride this out. Fine, even if Poland, Germany, France, Spain, the UK, and America, even the Scandinavian states, even if they view Ukraine as being expendable, it would still be in their best. It would still be in NATO's best interest to pursue or at least allow for the opportunity for peace. And generally speaking, if you're going to be a warmonger, if you want to go to war, if you have plans for world domination, you better dang well be capable of doing it. Because all of NATO has backed Ukraine. And how's that working out? So you've got Russia, and you've got how many nation states in Ukraine are fighting on Ukraine's behalf, including most of NATO, all of NATO. So again, grand strategy is important. Some of these larger, more long-winded thoughts are, I think, important. Maybe not things I say, but still, it's worth having the conversation. It's worth talking about these things and just kind of openly coming to some realizations real quick, because this has the potential. We're at one of those milestones again where this has the potential to get really, really ugly. And it's very clear that NATO has decided to sacrifice Ukraine to save NATO, but they may not succeed in doing the latter. Either way, it's going to be very, very nasty for the foreseeable future in Ukraine and probably for the rest of Western Europe as well. So that's pretty much all I have for today. I will spare you listening to the rest of my incoherent ramblings, and let's finish off with the GhostNet. So again, GhostNet's kicking off. It's doing pretty good. There are version 1.5 I'm still working on. I've hit a couple of roadblocks with regards to how I am trying to think about things. There's a couple of new concepts I'm trying to explain and trying to implement and trying to do things that would allow GhostNet to be a little bit more helpful and mostly to allow people to understand when they should use it and what's the best use case for it. So I'm still working on it. I'm sorry, I'm overdue. I know I promised this weeks ago, I guess, but it will be finished shortly. Who knows when? But I will do it. I'm trying to get it done. But again, once it comes out, you'll see like why this took me so long to figure out how to implement. But anyway, the GhostNet itself, lots of good reports this week. A few that I did not actually catch the call sign, and it was on like a partial call sign, so I don't even know who sent these. But again, people highlighting the schools being shut down or canceled. So again, thank you for this information. This is good information. I'm sorry that it's happening so much, but it does seem to be a very strong commonality around the country with general unspecified threats being called in. And you have to treat each threat seriously until it's discovered to be unfounded. So, these things just kind of tie up resources, and they're a very common tactic to be used by malign actors. Again, somebody talking about a district board member. I only caught part of this, so I'm sorry I didn't catch the first. It looks like I'm catching the back end of a conversation here, but again, somebody probably made some disparaging remarks about VP Harris and how this district board member is trying to be like targeted in some way. I don't know. I should have Googled this, but either way. Somebody asking here about a fill for GhostNet WinLink nodes. No, I don't. This is something I'm going to clarify in the next version. WinLink is one of the least important parts of the plan. It's just there in case you had to to familiarize people, and in case you had to send an email or send a very long email-like text message to one other person. So the part of the GhostNet that's just the WinLink section, that's really not that important. I mean, you can do whatever you want. We're just using peer-to-peer stuff. So in the GhostNet plan, you can see here the yellow part here. This is really just for people who want to make contact during JS8, call it, maybe send each other an email or something. It's only one person to one other person though, so it's a direct link between two people. That's the downside. We're not using WinLink's telnet. We're not using other people's infrastructure. It's just a person-to-person, peer-to-peer connection with WinLink. So that's what it's for. It's nothing more, nothing less. I will incorporate. I know people are griping about VARA HF being used because VARA HF is paid and it's proprietary. It's super awesome and it's really fast, but again, people don't like that part, so I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. Figure something out amongst yourselves. Like, if you want to use RDOP, use RDOP. I don't care. I will change that, though, and clarify that, just so that the standard is a little bit more up-to-date. It's helpful to learn how to use both VARA and RDOP for sending emails over HF radio. But I just picked VARA because it's faster, and it seems like it's better in every way, except for the fact that it's proprietary, which I don't like. So either way, for those of you who just tune out because you hate this radio stuff, fear not. I don't really like it either. But I will explain this. This will be a little bit more clear in due time. It's just going to take me a little while to get there, so just bear with me while I do that. But again, I did want to highlight somebody. Their call sign was garbled, so I only got half of it. But somebody said, "Greetings, everyone. First time on the net." So, again, new people are coming in. Somebody did. I didn't get a screenshot of it, so a screenshotter didn't happen right. Somebody said they heard 51 stations from, I think, Texas again. And somebody said they heard 11 from Louisiana. So, again, band conditions have been pretty good lately. So for those of you who are looking to go through and do the receive-only JS8 stuff, you don't need a license for that. You can just do it for free. You don't even need to buy anything. I have a whole video on that. So start there if you're looking to get into more of this radio stuff. I wish it were easy. It will be easier in the future. There are programs and projects being done to make this easier, but for now, this is what we've got to work with. So, expectation management. Expectation management is a big thing. So that's pretty much all I have for today. Here are the sources, as usual. again, there's just a lot going on in the world, and I haven't really had time to sit down and nail down some of the stuff that's a little bit more useful for you guys. So I'm sorry that these briefings sometimes become really just a very long format way to say I don't have a whole lot to say. So anyway, sometimes that happens, but either way, the usefulness in kind of fleshing out some of these more longer form ideas as opposed to just reading what I wrote in the wire is kind of helpful sometimes. So hopefully it's been helpful for you, but in any case, I will call it there for today. So thank you all for watching, and we will see you next time. And as always, fight in the shade.